Welcome to the Live Your Purpose podcast, featuring compelling interviews with big-hearted people in the Oklahoma City metro area who are leading, creating, and innovating on purpose. Get inspired by conversations with passionate difference makers from our local community. I'm your host, Charles Gossett, life purpose coach and founder of Full Integration Coaching. On today's episode, we sit down with Senator Carri Hicks, an educator, empowering leader, and passionate elected official committed to Oklahoma families, education reform, and being the change she hopes to see in the world. And now, the Live Your Purpose podcast. Welcome to this edition of the Live Your Purpose podcast. I'm here today with Senator Carri Hicks, who is a mother, an educator, and a lifelong Oklahoman. The daughter of a public school teacher, she graduated with degrees in mass communications and political science, as well as master's degrees in both leadership management and early childhood education. Hicks currently serves as an adjunct professor at Oklahoma City University, and in 2019 was named a Gaylord-McCasland Education Fellow by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. Among her many leadership roles, she works to equip teachers with STEM integration to prepare the next generation of Oklahomans for the changing workforce. She was also recently selected as one of the Journal Record's 40 under 40. So, Senator Carri Hicks, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. We've seen one another at several events around town, usually those involving music performances of some kind, because my wife, Christy Gossett, is a music teacher. Shameless plug.
And she's always very good at engaging those of us in this building on coming out to see how fantastic our public schools are doing. And I mean, more holistically speaking, I mean, a well-rounded education obviously integrates music at every level.
Yes, and I know if she were in the room, which she kind of is in spirit, she would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. So, well, as you may know, the show's called the Live Your Purpose podcast, and really it's very simple. The idea is to find local folks in the metro area who are living on purpose. They're living out their why, and they're making a contribution of some kind, and then they just tell their story. Okay, so we start with a kickoff question, and you've selected yours, which I think is going to be a lot of fun, and then we just see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah,
okay?
That sounds great.
All right, so Senator Hicks, what makes you want to get out of bed in the morning?
There are so many reasons that make me want to jump out of the bed in the morning to get my day started. Most notably would be my 3 kids. So I'm a mother of 3. They are 5, 3, and 2 years old. And ultimately, I think when I dream about their future and igniting their passions, ultimately I look at the state that we're currently living in, and I just recognize that many parts of it are broken. And so now, obviously, serving in the capacity as a state senator, it really allows me some opportunities to dream a little bigger, to talk about the changes that we absolutely have to make in order to make sure every child has the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, I love that. And so, right, and you're directly connected with the work that you're doing, and that's one of the reasons Christy and I, of course, also thought you would be a wonderful interview. What is it about the work that you're doing today that connects back to your children and really your background in teaching and other related fields?
Well, basically when I had made the decision to run, I felt like I had exhausted all the resources I had available to me to really elevate our message of what is happening in our classrooms across the state. We have limited resources, and ultimately our class sizes are spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
We are unable to retain our well-educated and well-trained workforce, and there's a lot of compounding factors, if you will, for those co-occurring events. And so, I had served on our negotiations team. I was building site representative, and ultimately felt like our message was still falling on deaf ears and needed a louder microphone, if you will, to really talk about the challenges in education. So I decided to run for office. Almost, number 2, if you have to assign, number 1, number 2 priorities. My son, who's 5, has type 1 diabetes. And so when people talk about, the rising cost of healthcare, we are actually living that. We're experiencing it on a deeply personal level. Insulin obviously continues to kind of dominate some of the headlines as far as it being one of the most expensive drugs currently on the market, and it's absolutely essential to sustain my son's life. And so, for both of those reasons, and recognizing not only that my profession was, really starting to become eroded, and realizing that our American healthcare system and the other kind of outside factors, if you will, on prescriptive medications and the costs associated with those, just absolutely, I felt as if there were no other alternative than to seek office to try and be a part of the solution.
Absolutely. And in the work that you're doing, one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, what is a typical day like? For those of us that don't know, I'm in the building. By the way, I'm on location here in the state capitol with Senator Hicks. What is it like on a daily basis to work here? No
2 days are ever the same.
Okay.
And, to kind of rewind a little bit, my husband and I both work multiple jobs to be able to afford insulin and to be able to make sure that our healthcare costs are covered.
I see.
And so my day usually begins around 4 a.m. I teach English as a second language online, and so I usually have about 4 to 6 classes under my belt before I ever even leave the house.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
We get our 3 kids ready for school. And then if we're in session, usually in the building or off-site at our first event, no later than 8:15. And then, it's pretty much a typical 12-hour day from there, and just whatever committee work looks like, policy meetings, community events, dinners, ultimately those are all very essential components of being able to make an informed decision as a senator. I know lobbyists can sometimes get a bad name, but they truly are the individuals who can give us information that we wouldn't have access to otherwise. And obviously, if they are taking compensation from a specific entity, the first question I always ask is, who's against this? Because some individuals will not be completely honest or transparent, and those tend to be the individuals I don't work with on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people in this building that will say, here's the opposite side of this argument, here's where they're coming from, and then at that point, it really does empower you to make an informed decision. So the day is long,
yes,
and the
imagine.
years are short, but session has its own kind of pace. The first 3 weeks are heavily involved with committee work. I'm on the Education, Health and Human Services Committee, the Transportation Committee, and then a subcommittee on select agencies, which is maybe my favorite to serve on.
Okay, tell me about that one. Yeah,
sure. We kind of oversee the entities that are non-appropriated agencies. So this is everything from the Boll Weevil Commission to TSET. So they have varied scale. The cosmetology board is always something that I feel like is very tangible for individuals to grasp onto.
Yeah.
They ultimately operate off of their licensure fees, and so they sometimes pay back into our general revenue operating fund and don't take an appropriation from the legislature, which, we're truly just there to make sure that their financials are sound and that they have, their long-term strategies and their missions are being carried out. So it's pretty fun work to kind of, comb through financial statements with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that we're not missing anything and that we're being very responsible with, the fees that individuals are paying in for these agencies. We want to make sure that those dollars are being maximized and not abused.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
One of the things, too, that I wanted to ask you was about, some of the challenges, and you've mentioned some of them. But before we went on air, there was a conversation that you needed to have, and it involved teaching. I'll just say that the field of education, and I'm telling you, I heard the teacher come out, and I'm around a lot of teachers, and it's good for my soul to hear that. But also, I hear your experience, I hear your passion for the field, and I hear your your real dedication to making a difference.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and so when you run into some of those frustrating elements, and they don't have to be described specifically, but when you run into frustrations and they didn't do what they said they were going to do kind of thing, how do you regroup and keep going?
I think 4 years before I ever even made the decision to run, I was consistently taking personal time away from the classroom to engage the lawmakers with what I felt like were needs that needed to be addressed. And obviously, as I said before, I felt as if it was falling on deaf ears, or that there just wasn't the political will in order to affect those changes that we were seeking. And so now, obviously being in this capacity, there are times that it just completely makes sense as to how bad the conditions have gotten inside our classroom, because individuals who are making decisions at this state level don't have the experience that I do. So, to really be able to speak to the logistical implementation of some of the things that they're seeking to change, I'll just give a very simple example. When we talk about integrating technology in the classroom, it's not just as simple as getting a class set of iPads. You have to have a charging cart. Do we have a port and a bandwidth capability to be able to sustain the iPads for an entire classroom? These are the logistical implications of something so straightforward as going one-to-one technology. And a lot of the times, it's not as though the administration or others are engaged in that conversation, but the responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of that classroom teacher. And so we just have to be mindful that there's more to the story on policy changes that we seek in this building than just, it'll be optional, or it'll be mandatory, or we're going to change this one word from a may to a shall. Those can have far-reaching consequences, if you will. And implementation is everything. And if we haven't thought through everything, then it can continue to exacerbate some of the challenges that I feel like we've yet to address on relieving those class sizes and feeling as if you're the only one in that building who cares about potentially the 32 sets of eyes that are staring at you every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those of us that are in the field or love ones that are, I've been both. I've been a TA and a mentor and done a lot with youth in schools in different ways. And as I've said, my wife's a teacher, and we know lots of teachers. And so what you're saying is, I'm like, yes. These are very similar, familiar concerns that many teachers have. And to know that you're thinking, I'm using these words strategically, tactically, you're planning, you're looking at the underlying factors that are going on, which are complex.
Yeah. And there's a lot of well-intentioned policy that we see.
Sure.
That I might 1,000% align with the intent of a bill, but then when you really try and roll that out across the spectrum, what does this actually mean, and what does it actually look like, and how does this impact, whatever it is, not just on education, it might not be the government's role, and I'm a Democrat, but I definitely believe in a responsible regulation. And especially when it comes down to education and public in particular, obviously, I just am frustrated by the amount of mandates that we currently are required to follow, and we've reduced funding over time. So, we've increased the accountability factor, if you will, but we're not willing to invest the amount of appropriate funds to make those mandates succeed. And I think that's where, I'm always trying to weigh the factors in. I think this is a really good policy. How much is this going to cost? It's not going to cost anything. I'm like, well, it will. If teachers have to go to additional professional developments, who's covering the cost of that? Is the district offering it for free? Are we giving the district money to be able to get somebody who's of substance? Or does this translate to an online module that's not really going to get at the heart of what we want?
Yeah.
So, that kind of stuff can get complex, but, I really just my heart is still in the classroom with all of my students that I've had, and thankfully some of them have come to visit me.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, now can you tell us about any of those that that seem like you can share with us?
Yeah, so I got my new office about a week before session started last year, and so there wasn't a lot of time to get things kind of lined out before just the chaos of session began.
Yeah.
But now, I've been able to put up things that make it still feel like my classroom. My class pictures for all 7 years that I was in the classroom, different posters and sayings that I had on the walls in my classroom. And so one of my students came up last year on their spring break just to say hi and check out my new office, and it was really awesome to be able to point to her picture in kindergarten, and she's now in 6th grade.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's really special.
It is. I mean, just thinking about the far-reaching impact that every educator has on the lives of our students makes me proud. It makes me feel honored to be able to speak to that in this building and in that capacity.
Well, it certainly shows.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Oh, yeah. It shows, and that's really a cool story. I'm privy to a lot of those stories at home from my wife. She's been doing this for like 20 years.
Yeah.
And so she knows adults that have children now that she taught music, and some of them went on to college and went to on scholarship, or maybe they didn't go to college, but they've kept music and they remembered her. And it's really cool to bump into your students. Yeah, it's legacy. It's really important work.
Yeah.
So well, wonderful. Okay, well, the conversation can go any direction, so I don't have to lead it, right? So, do you have a specific direction you want to take it next? Because I have a line of questions. If not,
sure.
Okay.
I think the frustrating part about where I currently am right now, in this particular legislative session, I spent the entire summer and into the fall months kind of crafting and creating some interim studies, which are a really neat opportunity to try and go in with just a question and see where the data takes you. And obviously, from my time in education, you never want to start out with a question that you think you already know the answer to, because of your bias. And so some of the things I spent the most time researching and trying to understand over the summer, unfortunately, didn't even get a hearing this year. So, it continues to be, an uphill battle in making sure that individuals understand the compelling nature of what we're trying to accomplish. And so just for example, when I was pregnant with our third, a study that was released indicated that Oklahoma had and still has the highest rate of infant and maternal mortality, higher than third world countries, in fact. And so, you can't read a statistic like that and not be moved to action. And obviously at that point, I was still in the classroom, but it's something that continues to haunt me. And so we worked on 2 really great pieces of legislation, one that was aimed more specifically at preventing infant suffocation, strangulation, in removing crib bumpers from the shelves of our stores here in Oklahoma, but also preventing and prohibiting online sales of those products. This is something that pediatricians have been recommending against for 20 years, and yet we still know that in Oklahoma, 27 individuals have lost their life in the past decade to these crib bumpers. And so it does pose a real threat as we're looking at ways to, support babies and to support parents or grandparents that are raising these babies in Oklahoma. I think there's an assumption that if you're buying a product from a well-respected baby store, that it must be safe. It must be safe for my child. And so, in fact, there's a class action lawsuit against Pottery Barn Kids in Tulsa that's currently in the works from a family who lost their son. And again, it was the assumption that this is a reputable, child-friendly brand, and we trusted that this was a safe product to use in our crib at home, and our son paid the ultimate price. So that did not get a hearing, but we continue to remain vigilant in knowing that it is the right thing to do, and that ultimately it might not have gotten heard this year, but we'll continue to raise awareness around it and see what we can do in the coming years. The other one was really on, we know that healthy moms make healthy babies.
Mm-hmm.
And so currently we only have a 60-day window for postpartum coverage for individuals that are on our Medicaid system. Over 60% of the births in Oklahoma last year were on our Medicaid system.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so this is kind of compelling
Mm-hmm.
data, if you will, and saying,
Yeah.
here's a link. If we continue to have the highest maternal mortality rate,
Mm-hmm.
then where's the gap? What are we missing here? And
Right.
so other states have applied for what's called an 1115B waiver. It's through our CMS program, and the Healthcare Authority would administer it through our Medicaid program to just extend that postpartum coverage for up to 12 months. It seems very common sense and very straightforward that, I go back to my own postpartum experiences with all three of my kids. They were all three very different experiences. And so as you look at the support that, that mother or that family might need and how that changes after each birth, I just can't even imagine not having health insurance 60 days or 6 weeks postpartum because for mental health reasons and others,
Mm-hmm.
physical reasons.
Yes.
You're not even medically released after 6 weeks if you've had a cesarean. So it just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I was told that it would be too costly, so they were unwilling to move forward with that. But I just push back on saying, is it more costly to lose the life of a mother or lose the life of a child who would then, potentially have a huge economic impact on our state? They're paying taxes, they're working, they're healthy, there's no way to quantify that loss of life. And so, we'll continue to raise awareness and talk about why, maybe there's a compromise to be found. But if we're serious about wanting Oklahomans to have great access to thriving opportunities, these two issues are no-brainers for me. So we'll just continue to try and move the minds and hearts of those that have the power to hear the bills.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing at length these two particular bills that are so near and dear to your heart, and that you've done your homework on, and that are frustrating at the same time, and they still. And you described how you're being resilient with them. You're moving forward. You're looking for other ways to keep moving forward and trying to get them passed.
Yeah.
What are a couple of bills or just other wins, we could say, that you've been a part of that mean a lot to you?
Yeah, there are so many daily wins
Mm-hmm.
that don't ever even come from legislation.
Okay.
Which is, legislation for me is kind of the last stop, if you will. If you can engage individuals, specifically agencies, in asking them about specific policies or procedures that they can change through their internal rulemaking process, that's been really, really fantastic. So I really looked to learning more about who our community partners are for the areas that I'm most interested in, which are definitely families.
Yeah.
And so Pivot OKC, I don't know if you're familiar with that organization.
Yeah, and I volunteer, by the way. I'll give them
I didn't know that.
not there, but at CSU Youth Shelter.
Yes.
So they know each other, and I'm a youth mentor there at
Yes.
CSU. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. CSU, Pivot, these organizations work specifically with youth and making sure that, if they're experiencing some kind of crisis or there's some kind of unmet need, they're really kind of geared towards, rallying around this kind of holistic approach to making sure that they have a warm place to lay their head at night, clothes if necessary, food in their belly. Just really doing some incredible work. And so, when it does feel hard in this building, I have to remind myself of the really great things that are happening outside of these walls. And another really great program that I just cannot express my, appreciation for is Remerge, which is ultimately a diversion program for mothers.
Yeah.
And They have a brand new building that, it's a public-private partnership, if you will, and they've got a lot of MOUs or memorandums of understanding with specific legal and courts, and I probably couldn't explain the complexities of all of it, but I mean, they have a really great curriculum where they're working with individuals who have substance abuse charges, in learning how to get their kids back and how to be prepared to be a parent once they complete the program, and their stories and their personal testimonies of individuals that have completed the program are just so powerful in that their recidivism rate is like 0.01. I mean, it's just phenomenal work. And I think it really speaks to the fact that if you give individuals a good education and a great opportunity, and you kind of build out the resources that are going to be necessary for sobriety, then you really do enable them to have power over their lives, and agency is everything in order to be a parent.
Yes.
You can't care for another if you have unmet needs in yourself. And so it's pretty powerful. When I walked through on my tour of the new location, there was a mother breastfeeding, and I mean, that just keeping moms and babies together is so important for all of the developmental milestones that we know are necessary to not repeat that cycle.
Absolutely. And Christy and I talk about that quite a bit, and the importance of family and keeping them together, and the sad stories when that doesn't happen in families. And excuse me a minute. By the way, there is some construction going on, if you didn't know. If you can hear that over these microphones, I'm not sure if you can. It's amazing construction going on in the state capitol, but it's kind of loud.
It is loud.
And we're in a quiet part of the building right now, right?
I know. We had to change locations because our office is just unusable right now. But that's okay. It's I think the completion timeline is 2022. Okay. So we're almost there.
Almost. I love that attitude. That is an optimistic attitude right there. Absolutely true. So yeah, but I was saying, I wonder if some dust is like shaking out, and I'm choking on it a little bit, but no. So yeah, Christy and I talk about that a lot, keeping families together and what that does for kiddos. And as a person in long-term sobriety myself from alcoholism, this is 14 years for me, and my wife. Thank you. My wife went through all of that until she had enough, and she left with our young girls. And so we've been on that side of it. That was the right decision for her, those that don't know my story. And it was right for me too. And we got back together after several months of sober living house and lots of therapy and 12 steps. And we have a much better life than we ever could have imagined. And it's because of those services and those people in our lives and those opportunities for sobriety. Sobriety, for those that are in addiction, it has to come first. It has to come first. You don't go get a job and get back with your spouse or your girlfriend. Get sober first. Get clean. And then start your new life.
Yeah, and I mean, so that kind of brings me to another area that obviously was very important before taking office, and continues to be something that I'm not seeing a whole lot of action. Lots of conversations about criminal justice reform, but the legislative will has somewhat kind of stalled out, which I don't fully understand. I know we want to be very careful, obviously, about changing certain things that could have negative consequences to the general public. We want to weigh those decisions very, very carefully. But one of the bills that moved through both Senate and floor last year with no opposition, and is hopefully awaiting a hearing in committee this year. Senate Bill 969 is just about, it's a common sense bill on criminal justice reform. We know that individuals who are released have staggering fines and fees that they have to pay back, and depending on their level of healing or sobriety in their journey, this could be the tipping point to ultimately spiral. And so this specific measure is about failure to appear. And so if an individual is currently in custody somewhere in the state, whether that's a county or city, and they are also supposed to be appearing somewhere else before a court, they get a fine or a penalty for not being there failure to appear.
Mm-hmm.
However, I mean, it's physically impossible for an individual to leave holding to make their court appearance.
Yeah, that's insane.
So, this is just one way in which we think it's smart reform.
Mm-hmm.
It's ultimately acknowledging that there's a problem here.
Mm-hmm.
If individuals are in holding or are in custody, then we need to make sure that the court is not paying a price for that, because they're holding the hearing regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as though some kind of communication would transpire that might be able to enable some of that to rework it. But I understand it's all about separate entities and agencies, and
Yes.
some of that needs to remain separate. But
Mm-hmm.
I think when collaboration makes sense, we should be asking why these things are all held separately, and if there's a way that we can do a more integrated approach, I think it's better for people. And so we'll see if we can get it out of the House this year. But I mean, it's not a controversial criminal justice reform bill. It's pretty straightforward in trying to reduce or eliminate some of the debt that individuals are faced with when they're released.
Well, this is just me talking, so don't listen to me too close. But I'm thinking, what about a Zoom room? And just have them. So I'm not trying to solve the problem, but so much of our criminal justice system seems to be punitive. There's a lot of punitive laws out there and processes out there, in my opinion, designed to keep people in it. And as someone who escaped most of that in my, due to privilege, I believe is part of it, but not getting caught is part of it too, with my past and drug use and alcoholism and drinking and driving and other stuff that I'll admit to. Some people get caught, and they get caught in the system. And I can't imagine being caught in that kind of thing. And I can't appear, and yet I get fined and all that mess.
Well, and I mean, I think, again, like just to go back to my background in education, you always seek first to understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's so much power in being heard and being seen in whatever capacity. And so truly, when I started engaging in conversation about criminal justice reform, it was important for me to not be speaking out of ignorance. And so, I do have a very limited background as it relates to courts and those proceedings and procedures and policies that impact the courts. And so, I have spent a lot of time. I've toured Mabel Bassett, engaging their folks with as many questions as I could possibly think of. Well, what would I need if I were in this situation, and how would I move forward, and how do I get there, and are you guys doing these kinds of things? And then I most recently 2 weeks ago I went to Joseph Harp, which happens to be the largest mental health facility in the state. It's 30 acres. It's massive. It doesn't just have inmates with mental health needs, but it also has a what they call a J unit, or a juvenile unit. So that was a really, really tough experience to see faces that are very much familiar. To be in that place was very jarring. But the one thing I came away from those experiences is there are a lot of really great things going on in our correction system. They are continuing to find opportunities for employment and train to release, and they're trying to expand their training programs through our career tech system to make sure that individuals have access to higher wage jobs than just an hourly amount, because what we know is that if you have to pay back these fines and fees, you can't do it off of an hourly job. And so I've been really impressed by some of the things that are currently going on, and even most recently, Mabel Bassett is going to be launching what's called RISE, and it's through Ms. Zuckerberger's work on training individuals for IT and tech jobs, which will be a massive opportunity for the females that we have incarcerated there, and it is specific to women.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, my biggest frustration after touring both of the facilities was that they have more opportunities in the male prison. We know that we have more women incarcerated than men.
Yes.
And so my assumption is that if we had at least equal opportunity for training and for earning potential while individuals are incarcerated, that might change. So, I'm continually impressed with the corrections' willingness to, move in a more fluid direction where it makes sense to try and stop and prevent some of these problems from ever occurring. And so they are really doing some incredible work. Unfortunately, when budget decisions impacted everything in our state, those career tech programs that were being offered were severely limited. And so we know we still have to restore that funding. It's not happening at the level it needs to be to really reach everyone while they're with us. So, those are the kinds of things that I think help in the policy making conversations, because sometimes there's legislation that's a solution in search of a problem, that it might not actually exist, but they've heard a story about something and you go, well, I was there, did you talk to so-and-so?
Right.
And it's like, oh no, well,
Right.
like, come on, are we really?
Let's get the information first.
Yeah. And so I just hope I continue to do my homework before filing policy, because it really does have far-reaching impacts, for good or for bad. And so I think all of us that are in an elected capacity owe that to the people we represent, to make sure that we really are engaging individuals in dialogue that maybe presents an opportunity where legislation isn't even needed to achieve the ends that we're trying to get at. So
Yeah.
lots of different ways that you can impact change as a state lawmaker, not just through policy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that
Yeah.
again. And I want to say that I'll take just a second. I do this every once in a while. Those entrepreneurs that are listening, because some of you are, who knows? Maybe there's an opportunity there. And I've threatened to do this before. I use the word threaten lightly. Something like Homeboy Industries for Oklahoma with Father Greg Boyle. And that's idealistic, and I am an idealistic dreamer, but I also can help to make things happen. So those entrepreneurs that are interested in social justice reform, and there are some out there that I already know they're doing work, especially with young people. But Poetic Justice is in Mabel Bassett too. They're working with the women and helping them write poetry and reclaim parts of their lives. I've sat in and I've gone.
They also have this program for me. I love it for so many reasons. So they have a dog handling program at Mabel Bassett.
Okay.
And obviously animal therapy is a really powerful experience for many different things. And so when I was speaking with the ladies that were in the program, they were like, it made me love again. I have been so disappointed and so degraded to a point where I didn't even see value in myself. And obviously made some bad decisions along the way, and I just felt like, I didn't have any worth left to give. But training with this animal has not only given me a purpose, but it's also reignited those parts that I thought were gone of love and how it can be reciprocated. And so it's a really cool program. They teach them how to be dog handlers, and they have animals on site through local shelters to rehab dogs, to be able to be reintegrated and go back to the kennels and potentially be adopted. It's just a really cool, very creative partnership that I think has a lot of tertiary benefits that might not be, this is not our primary goal, but these are the ways in which it is impacting, our ladies in a really meaningful and deep way.
Right. Yeah, and creativity and innovation is something our state is known for, in certain pockets. And so there's one of them. And I'm sure we've got lots of other creative folks out there with some ideas of their own.
Yeah.
Well, Senator Hicks, I do want to honor our time, and we have a few more minutes.
Okay.
But, so one question I wanted to ask you, and then I'll let you close it however you want to, but I did at least want to ask this to you. Like, what do you do for fun? I mean, you've got so much going. You're up at 4 a.m. and you're teaching 6 classes and doing amazing things up here at the Capitol. What do you do when you have time for fun and enjoyment?
You know, my kids are just my bright spot always. And so, you know, whether that's going to the park or taking a hike or, you know, just spending time even cooking, you know, those are the kinds of experiences that I remember from my childhood, just being, you know, happy experiences and time when there wasn't necessarily a plan for the day, but we got to hang out. And so, that's what I like to do for fun. My kids are very curious, very active, you know, constantly in that information-seeking stage. So, as a result, we do a lot of, you know, travel and just, you know, trips on a tankful, if you will, around the town. One of our favorite places that we can be spotted at is the library.
Oh, yeah. We spent a lot of time there, too.
Yes, I love to read. I set a goal for myself last year that I didn't reach, narrowly missed, to read 50 books. And I reset that again for this year. Last year, I think I made it to 46.
That's
so
a lot of
so
books.
Close.
Okay, but you didn't make the goal. You didn't budge on your goal, did you?
No, so
Okay.
I'm coming back this year. We're going to see if we can get to 50 books this year. And I'm involved in a book club with other women that just continue to inspire me and challenge me in new and different ways. And you know, I think it's important to just. My dad told me growing up, you know, it's important to have something that's just you. You know, outside of your family, outside of your spouse, it's important to have something that's just you. So, you know, that book club has kind of become that space for me. You know, and the challenges that we have going on up here, you know, vary, but having a great community of individuals that just bring a totally different perspective to conversation is it's fun. You know, it's been fun. So love to read, love to go to the library, love to hang out around Oklahoma City. You know, when the weather gets nicer, we'll be out camping. But, you know, I think the more that you can connect with humanity and with nature, the better we all are. So
I would second that. Well, so are there any closing remarks that you had for us to shut this down?
Yeah,
okay,
you
good.
know, one of the quotes that I really live by is to be the change you want to see in the world. And so I used to tell my students in the classroom, that's kind of how we closed our day, because I mean it, you know, and really when things had gotten to a point where, you know, I found myself more frustrated than inspired, it became really, really clear that I wasn't living by the words that I was hoping my students were. So sometimes taking risks that feel a little scary can lead to some really rewarding experiences. And so, you know, I continue to obviously want to represent my colleagues and my students and advocate on their behalf. And obviously, as my family is very young and thinking about their experiences with public education, our healthcare system, and just needed reforms for a more prosperous and better place to live, you know, I hope that I can stay true to those values and really just being committed to the positive change that I hope we can make when we all work together. You know, I think, unfortunately, the stories that get the most attention are when we disagree. But I will say that, you know, more times than not, things are passing with unanimous consent. And, you know, I think that really lends itself to the fact that we are trying to engage each other in meaningful dialogue, because, you know, if people feel silenced or you know, disempowered, you know, that impacts all of us in a really negative way. And I just don't believe in the scarcity mindset.
No.
I don't know how someone else's happiness potentially impedes mine. I don't believe that. And I know, because the data shows us that when we all do better, we all do better. So I'm just still in shock and in awe to be the representative from my Senate district. I'm the first female, and that is kind of a sad testament to the fact that we know that not all pockets of our community have had equal access to representation, and so that continues to remain to be something that I'm very passionate about, making sure that people don't feel disempowered to where they don't participate, because I think that's how things go really wrong. So if we just encourage each other to continue to be in conversation, we can do hard things when we talk to one another.
Well, I'm all in for what you're discussing. That's what I do every day too. So, Senator Carri Hicks, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Live Your Purpose podcast. I hope you've been inspired by my conversation with today's guest. If you like what you hear, please share with your social networks and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Charles Gossett, life purpose coach and founder of Full Integration Coaching. To learn more about the life coaching, public speaking, and retreat services that I offer, visit fullintegrationcoaching.com. And you can follow along with me on Facebook and Instagram at Full Integration Coaching. Until next time, remember, you were meant to live on purpose. Start living yours today.